Welcome to the Become Who You Are podcast, a production of the John Paul II Renewal Center. I'm Jack Riggert, your host. While the attack on our freedoms, especially those with traditional Christian values, has been going on for some time, anyone paying attention knows that the COVID pandemic gave the so-called elite and the rulers of this present age the catalyst they sought to further consolidate power, silence, and even censor, of course, opposing voices. Most people that I know, like sheep being led to the slaughter, simply fell silent and got in line. And we've seen this many, many times during history. But there's always a few voices, those who not only saw the threat clearly, but had the courage to stand up and fight against the tyranny and the evils of our modern age. One of those voices is with us here today to share his firsthand account. Jeffrey M. Trissell is an attorney who fought on the front lines in the heroic legal battles during the 2020 and the 2021 COVID-19 pandemic, and he wrote a book about it, Unlocking the Church's Legal Victory Against California's Pandemic-Era Religious Discrimination, detailing the unprecedented lockdown of churches in the United States. Jeffrey is a civil litigation attorney in private practice with the law firm Lemandry and Jonah. He obtained his Bachelor of Arts degree in French and philosophy as a fourth-generation cowboy attending Oklahoma State University and obtained his Juris Doctorate from the George Washington University Law School in 2013. He resides in San Diego, California, with his wife and two daughters. The vast majority of his legal work is devoted to constitutional rights, including First Amendment litigation, redistricting, defamation, and education rights. Mr. Trissell, thank you so much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I should probably also mention, because I love them, the Thomas More Society. You work as special counsel for them. Thomas More, our audience is pretty familiar with them, and the ADL, and these wonderful firms that stand up against really religious tyranny that we see all over. You made a number of appearances in courts and 3 trips to the U.S. Supreme Court within a year. And a permanent injunction ended up being entered against Governor Newsom in the state of California. You were a busy man. I love the book. I love the way you started out with some terms. For those of us who are not legally minded, I really recommend not going through those early, let's say, introduction and chapter, not even a whole chapter, but defining what the court systems are like, etc. And so thank you for doing that. You set it up beautifully.
Well, thank you. As I've gotten more feedback since it was written, I've actually been surprised by how many people greatly enjoy the sometimes tiresome description of how the law works. Because if you don't go through that chapter, you can't really understand a lot of the book. But once you do, it's really rewarding, and then you can really understand how things are progressed. It also explains, how novel this situation was. Most of my cases are not over, right? Like I've been working on cases from 2016, 2020, and we're in 2015 now, right? 2025 now, and those cases are still ongoing. The reason I could write the book was because this story came full circle in a year and ended definitively, which I don't usually have cases that do that.
Yeah, that's true. Isn't that something that just lingers on and on and on? Well, we saw, and I don't know how you would describe this, but it was, I guess, when I look back, and you made clear in your book, and even though you may not state it like this, so I don't want to put any words in your mouth, especially since you're an attorney, so you could stop me and correct me. But the hypocrisy was amazing. The hypocrisy and the way they used the law to go after churches and small businesses and other things, and really twisting and distorting this. It was really something to see. And so the question becomes, when they step in, the government steps in and takes power like this, it's very difficult, especially for small businesses, for individual churches to fight back, because they have an unlimited resource, right? They have people on their payroll that can come after you. The government can. They have our tax dollars. And then they know we're limited because we only have the rest of our tax dollars to pay and defend ourselves. And there's always fear, right? There's always fear. Who am I? I'm just a little guy, and the whole state of California is coming after me. What's that like to fight against that? And should really, what is it when the pandemic strikes? Does the government have, because they're always going to come up with an excuse of some sort, right? There's a war. There's this. There's this. Are there limits to this? And I think that's really what you were working at here with the book.
Right. In most of my cases, we can recover our attorney's fees at the end of the case. And to do that, we got to document how much time we've spent. And I've done probably half a dozen attorney's fees motions, and we usually have 4,000 hours incurred, right? Which
Whoa,
even if you know at regular attorney rates, that's a lot of money,
that's a
right?
lot of
That's
money.
a lot of money. And so it takes um, really the support of the Thomas More Society and other nonprofit law firms to help us do that. My firm will do a little bit pro bono, but we're a small firm of 10, 12 attorneys, and we can't work for 3,000 hours without getting paid.
No.
We love to help people who don't have the means to actually pay for attorneys. But without this, without that aggressive pushback of 4,000 hours of attorney time, we're not going to beat California or the United States government. I mean, they're continuing going, and the Department of Justice California has like a $1.6 billion budget, right? It's a huge enterprise,
Amazing.
and
Yeah.
they just throw money at things.
And they have people on staff and they can just say, hey, Jack, you go that way and attack that guy, and you go that way and do this, and so, yeah, you look at, I was in business most of my life as an entrepreneur, and really saw what was going on, and you would get sued over something, and the time and the money and the resources and the nervous energy it would take, it's really can suck the energy out of you, and especially when you're pouring your blood into these businesses and these churches and things. Is religious liberty becoming a second tier constitutional right that the government can be free just to ignore? That's what seems to happen during this. And if this is going to happen again, and we want to kind of know what, how we should be handling this from looking at your back cases. So if you could bring us forward a little bit and up to speed on some of the work that you did.
Right. So the book itself it talks about the legal fights in 2020, right? And my law firm filed 3 lawsuits, and we won at the U.S. Supreme Court in one of the 3, and the other 2 they were mooted out because of that one victory. And when I wrote the book, I wanted to both detail the history and provide a lot of my own commentary because I spent a whole year almost doing nothing but COVID litigation and had a lot of thoughts on it. And when I wrote the book, actually, it didn't take me that long to write because that's what I do. I'm a writer. But I sat on it for a while because I felt like we were in this period after the pandemic where we were still trying to figure out what it meant, right? And people were tired of hearing about the pandemic. And now that we're 5 years on, I felt like it was time to publish the book and to uh, feel like my comments could be not just instinctive reactions, but maybe more measured and well thought out. And so I do think now we're getting a little bit of, hopefully, a renaissance, a third great awakening. I think the pandemic had a huge psychological effect on our nation, in terms of realizing that, hey, we can't let our religious rights be completely trampled. I'm feeling more optimistic 5 years out. When I wrote the book originally, I was pessimistic because of how significant the trampling of our religious rights was. But I think I'm not the only one who saw that. And so I'm looking forward. I mean, we'll see. I mean, there's the paradigm shifts in the Republican Party are quite fascinating, and how things have switched from in my mind, the most important shift was really the Dobbs decision. That kind of took the focus away from the federal fights to the state fights across all the culture war issues, including religious liberty. Obviously, now with the Trump administration, I only have to sue Governor Newsom. I don't have to sue President Biden, which is, that always is the next 4 years are going to be a completely different litigation for me. But at least even when we have 8 years from now, a President Newsom or whoever, I don't know. I feel like there's a tone shift, and I'm hoping that we won't have to sue the federal government as much anymore.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, and I meant to take that Trump hat down. I hope I don't offend you. And I meant to take it down. And I tell you why I put it up, because we have an apostolate, Mr. Trissell, on, it's called Claymore. It's the big sword behind me. It's for young men. It's Gen Z men who stood up and voted for Trump. And I just had a show and we hung it there. And what they saw is kind of what you're describing here. They didn't know exactly what it was, but something was wrong. Something was oppressive. Something was wrong in their own hearts and in the culture itself. And without getting into the weeds here, when they saw Trump stand up, they thought somebody was fighting for them, and they saw a window of opportunity. They didn't know why. So it's a great time, anyways, for us to evangelize. So again, I'm sorry I forgot about that up there. But that's the mood that changed, and I think it woke people up. I hope so. Even though I'll ask you this. I saw a lot of fear. I was amazed by people that I knew, men that I knew that I thought were men, and mad at me because I didn't always wear a mask properly, or keep my 6 foot distance or whatever, or I was pushing back, with the John Paul II Renewal Center. We were pushing back on the Catholic Church for closing all these churches. And I couldn't believe how much vitriol we got. I mean, I'm sure you got that too. How did you feel about that? People that would normally be behind you, you're fighting them at the same time, in essence, that you're fighting, the other side. How did you feel about that?
Well, not to get too personal, but my own religious faith was a little bit shaken, right? Not in the sense of you ever really truly doubted, right? Like I'm a devout Catholic, cradle Catholic, and I will always be, no matter what. My personal confidence in the hierarchy of the church was a little bit less like, well, I'm supposed to be looking up to you, and I'm supposed to try to be obedient and try to be deferential and respectful. And come on, you guys, this is not right. And when you're trying to just be humble as a good Catholic, it can be very frustrating when you don't have good leaders.
Yeah.
So, I personally was very frustrated with the lack of strength by Catholic leaders, and whether they're bishops or priests, or just lay male leaders. I attend men's groups. I think men's spirituality is very important thing for men to study, and yeah, it was challenging.
And unfortunately, look, I didn't mean to go and take you in the weeds here, but I mean, particularly it was the Vatican. I mean, it seemed to be led by Pope Francis. Unfortunately, these are my words, not yours. But it was led by him. With the church lockdowns and then the vaccine mandates and everything, right in the Vatican. But here's what it did. I think it just put everybody back on their heels a little bit. People that would have had the courage. I think if John Paul II was there, knowing communism and what they did, and the tyrants and the totalitarianism and the dictatorships, I don't think he would have put up with that, and that would have changed it, because let's talk about the cases that you had, because these were smaller churches. They weren't Catholic churches, obviously, and they were standing up. Very courageous, very courageous. Can you tell us a little about them and how that was to work with them? Because I'm really enamored with the work that you did, and also with the bravery of those pastors.
Right. We decided to file a lawsuit really in mid-April 2020. My firm, we're a bunch of devout Catholic men who are led by Charles Lamandry, who is a bulldog, not afraid of anything. And he basically said, this is the reopening that Governor Newsom had announced was not fair. And we discussed it, the partners and I, and roundtabled it, and decided we needed to file a lawsuit. And we had to find a plaintiff, right? That was really the initial thought, was we need a plaintiff to sue. And so we called
Good
all
for
the Catholic
him.
churches we knew, right? And we know the Eastern Catholic churches. We know the Diocese of San Diego. There's quite a few Eastern Catholic churches in San Diego, actually, that we worked with. Everybody said no, right? Like it was, and then we started calling the Protestant churches that we knew, because we had defended a lot of them over the years, and everybody said no. It was really like we couldn't find anybody. We couldn't find anybody to sue until one person connected us with Pastor Hodges, Bishop Hodges of the South Bay Pentecostal Church, and he was the first person who really said, I think we need to stand up. And so we recruited him to join the lawsuit. Now, he was eager to join the lawsuit, but frankly, we had never represented a Pentecostal church before. I mean, we'd represented a lot of evangelical megachurches in their fights against the state, but we had never represented Bishop Hodges. He was just not one of our prior contacts, but he was willing to stand up.
And he had already taken a stance that he was not going to close. Did
No.
he take that prior to
Bishop
that?
Hodges, like everybody else, yeah, he closed the church, his church.
Okay.
At that point, we wanted to take a as safe a case as possible. So we were basically saying, we're not open yet. We want an order from the court saying we're allowed to open. And then if we do that, we will enforce all of the safety requirements, social distancing, masks, which the theory of that case was we wanted to say, look, we're doing everything we can, everything possible. There's no reason we shouldn't be open, even though we didn't. Anyway, that was a theory of that case.
Yeah, because to your point, I mean, and we know because there were stores and different, retail spaces, et cetera, liquor stores, et cetera, that were allowed to be open.
Right. And well, Even, frankly, we would say even hospitals, right? Hospitals are allowed to be open because they're absolutely necessary. Well, worship is absolutely necessary, right? It's life-saving, right? It's no less necessary than open heart surgery because it's absolutely necessary. It's just not something that can be given up. And so after we filed a lawsuit on behalf of Bishop Hodges in early May 2020, by the end of May, we had our loss by the U.S. Supreme Court, 5-4 loss, which was very, very disheartening for me. I had spent, to get to the U.S. Supreme Court in three weeks, I had to actually do the first all-nighter I'd ever done, where I wrote a 8,000 word brief from
Oh,
9 p.m. to 4 a.m. and then sent it to my partners and said, please edit this and file it. I'm going to sleep. And we did that 3 times overnight to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then we got a 5-4 loss. Right.
wow.
And that was a very, very disheartening. And the scary thing about that was we then got an announcement to the whole world that the Supreme Court was not on our side. And that's when we started getting a lot more pushback. That's when we started getting the prosecutions, right, where the government was coming after churches who had just ignored what the government was saying. Because, yeah, there are plenty of churches who just opened up. Depending on your local jurisdiction, that could have been fine. Here in San Diego, we are a purple city. We used to be very red, and now we're becoming more blue. Now we're pretty much blue, but I still think of us as purple. Back then, we had a
You're an optimist, right?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist. When the pandemic started, I believe we had a red mayor, and there were no county officials or city officials coming after places that were open. Towards the end of 2020, we got a blue mayor, and things started to change. So, you know, that's when I had the case on Grace Community Church, on the case on behalf of Grace Community Church started in LA over the summer because they just decided to reopen. And the county of Los Angeles decided, well, then we're going to come after you. And that became a very different type of law, right?
Okay, so
Where you're on the run and you're defending against, well, a city that is bigger than like 40 of the states, right? 10 million people city.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
10 million people counting.
And what kind of pressure do they put on those churches, Jeffrey? And you know, when they, you say they come after them, you know, and again, I was in business, so I have a sense of this, but for our audience that maybe wasn't, it can be very, very rattling for people that aren't used to this. You know, how did they take that? And you know, and I always get, you know, wonder how the pastor himself, right, and the people around him, you know, they have a real conviction for this, and how far are they willing to go, because it's not easy, is it?
So the first thing is you should definitely reach out to a nonprofit law firm whenever you're dealing with the government in this context. Because the initial thought is you can just ignore it. You push back and stand up and be strong and be a man. And that's probably the right answer. But you also need somebody to tell you what the risks are. So Father Burfitt, who we represented in Los Angeles County also, he got a citation when the citation says, you know, approximately 11 people were seen leaving the church. And it was just like this really, you know, it's just like a county health citation. It's fine, probably $250. It was left at his residence because he left the church unlocked. People could come in and pray if they wanted to. Depending on your personality, that citation could be intimidating, or you could say, oh, it's $250. Who cares? You know, I'm going to leave my church unlocked.
We're going to ask you to join us by helping us get the word out. So if you could make sure you subscribe and then hit like, no matter which platform you're on. Remember that the Become Who You Are podcast is on audio, on any music or podcast app. We're up on Rumble, YouTube. You can find us on X. When you do, subscribe, hit the like button. Couple things to share with people. Love Ed. Love Ed is just such an important apostolate. So it's within our apostolate, the John Paul II Renewal Center. This helps parents give the talk to their children. We're trying to push back on all these gender ideologies and the porn culture, and give children the truth, and do it through their parents, and we help them do that. The other one is really taken off too. It's Claymore Militus Christi, Soldiers for Christ. That's where you see the sword behind me. That's the big sword. That's our logo for Claymore. That's a Claymore sword. And this is for young people, especially young men, Gen Z, high school, all the way through. Let's call it till they're 30 years old or so. they're starting to really understand that something nefarious, very toxic is going on in the culture. And so they're stepping into the church and we're discipling them. So we want to help get the word out about those things. And lastly, consider financially supporting us. Everything's in the show notes. Hey, God bless you. Thanks again.
And for a lot of the churches who got citations like that, that was fine. You pay the citation or you ignore it, and eventually, whatever, the pandemic ends. There was one case of a church in California that I was following closely, and I talk about in the book, where I think their ultimate fine was $3,000, even after they were hauled into court and they got a judicial order saying you have to close. The judge, at the end of the day, only slapped them on the wrist. But that's not every case, right?
You talked about Santa Clara, and the church up there was getting whacked, right? I mean, it was in the millions, wasn't it?
Millions of dollars in fines. And, there's a pastor in Louisiana who was placed under house arrest with an ankle bracelet, right? That's as far as I've seen them go in America, which was, thank goodness. But obviously in Canada, there were stories of churches being condemned and, fences being put up around.
Pastors were thrown in jail up there, right? Do we have any pastors thrown in jail here? Do you know?
The only one I know of is Pastor Spell in Louisiana, who was under house arrest.
Okay. So, Father, is it Burfitt that you had just mentioned? So he's a Catholic priest,
right? He's SSPX.
Okay, SSPX, and he was over 5 churches, and were they all basically closed, but the door was open and people could go in and pray, but he wasn't trying to say, "Hey, I'm offering a worship service," from my recollection, right?
Right. So he oversees 5 parish communities. So in Los Angeles, he has his church, where's his residence, and the other priests in residence. But in San Diego, for example, they were renting a church. I think it might have been because in San Diego, we're a big military town. We have these old military churches that they no longer use and they just rent out. So I think he was renting a church, but they were no longer able to rent it, right? And the government shut down. And so that one was just closed. And I don't really know all that much about what's happening in the other counties. A lot of them were rural counties where I presume the church was just open.
Was anybody in the diocese there? So he fell mostly in the LA, in the Los Angeles diocese? So was the bishop there, the archbishop there? Was there any support for him? I mean, did they come out and support them? Vocally, financially? Did they, anything at all? Did you get it? Did you have a sense of anything like that?
No, there was definitely no public vocal support. In terms of behind-the-scenes support, not from the Los Angeles Archbishop or the bishops there, but we were getting support from behind the scenes from some bishops, but nobody was willing to stand up and stand forward.
How sad is that? Because if the Catholic Church would have put their weight behind this, some more of these other, pastors too in the evangelical churches, etc., would have had even more confidence. It just shows you when we back down. And we take that, put your head between your legs, cowardice type of position. It doesn't bode well for the rest of all of us fighting for religious freedom, does it? And I know you should be careful, and I shouldn't ask you stuff like that. So just plead the fifth if you want to when I do that. I'm just mystified myself, and I do
think there's truth to the statement that if you stand up, you get your head cut off, right? So you have to be very careful in these cases. And for the most part, before I file a lawsuit, my cases are very, very well thought out, in terms of choosing venue, trying to find a conservative venue, trying to find a proper framing of the case and a theory about how we're going to win on appeal. These cases were much more like, well, this is life and death, right? The emergency procedures that we used, the clerks who handle them are usually called the death clerks because they're dealing with emergency death penalty cases, right? Those are the ones where you say, I need a ruling in less than 8 hours. When the Ninth Circuit says you lose at noon on Saturday, and I say I want to open up my church on Sunday, well, the clerk who deals with, a turnaround that fast is the death clerk. And so calling up the death clerk and saying, we need to open our church for my normal case, right? Not the one that has this huge rush. Yeah, it's very important to think things through very carefully. And that's why in my mind, it's been great. I feel like we've seen an explosion of religious liberty law firms in the past 15 years, including the Thomas More Society, right, has grown aggressively and significantly. We've got some, more and more wins behind our back. And so we've been able to grow. Because if you think these things through, they're winnable. If you don't, if you just stand up and you're being sued in San Francisco County State Court and your appeals process is the First District Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court, you're just going to stand up and get your head cut off.
Well, I think that's what really makes the rest of us nervous, you know. Look, we have an apostolate here. We're not all that big. And you know, we would go into churches and we were speaking to people, etc. And you feel very, man, it's just like, without armor, it almost seems like, that you can really get picked off. So I think that's, it's good to be talking to you, and it's good to be, reading books like yours. And I'll make sure, of course, I put this in the show notes. But, because we have to get confidence, we have to get conviction. So the first thing you're recommending is we found, can we will somebody pick up the phone for most of us? And like you said, there are more. The Alliance Defending Freedom, of course, is out there at Thomas More Society. Now I'm from Chicago, so they have a big office right here in Chicago, so that's wonderful. Is it Liberty Counsel? There's a couple really getting more and more well known for this. Is it individual donors and people that are trying to fund this? In other words, if I call them up and I don't have unlimited resources, right? They're going to do their best to work with me. But who's helping all of these firms underneath? I mean, are these patriots? Are these Christian patriots probably? But and there's got to be others.
Yeah, it's for the most part small donors sending in monthly payments to the law firms, which amazes me. My mother works for or she manages a crisis pregnancy center in Virginia, or a series of them, and comparing the fundraising practices of her group and our group, it's very similar and very different, but in the sense that we're all just trying to do our best to help people, and I help people who need a lawyer, and so donations really just ensure that I can spend 3,000 hours helping somebody when it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So you said you feel optimistic about the future here. I mean, I think most of the people that I talk to, especially with young families and stuff, really feel that the culture itself is under attack, marriage, the family, children, of course, things like that. So, the Catholic social teaching, I always look at it almost like a pyramid in front of you, like a triangle, like a pyramid shape in front of us. So with marriage and the family, Christ and the church, is holding up the bottom. And then we go out to your realm there, which is, taking this out into polity, taking this out into the way we organize our societies, and all the way up into our laws. And our laws have to be just. We really saw an attack on this. Will you keep it up? Will you keep working now that you have this, you have this knowledge now, you have this background. It's amazing amount of work and things that you've gone through. And you specialize in those things. Is that your cup of tea? These are constitutional rights, of course. But you also mentioned education in there, and I want to ask you a question about that. What you're seeing in the educational realm too, because we're being censored there right now. Parents are being censored there. Right?
So I am right. I work for a private law firm, so we do pretty much everything. But because I know constitutional law very well, because I tend to specialize in First Amendment litigation, free speech, free exercise of religion, that translates into the education context pretty well. And most of my education cases have actually been not on the nonprofit side, trying to help foster kids navigate the system in California and the foster education rights in California. But in terms of education in general, especially under the religious liberty context, the way I think of it is the Supreme Court has the final say, and they're moving in the right direction, but they don't want to be pushed too hard. So all the religious liberty attorneys and all the religious liberty law firms are basically trying to push the Supreme Court in the right direction. And the Supreme Court says, we're taking our steps, but we're going to do one at a time. We're not going to jump to head of the line. So there was a very disappointing case at the U.S. Supreme Court this year regarding whether a Catholic school can operate a charter school and be publicly funded. And the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to decide the issue and kicked it back down to the lower courts. And, I was really optimistic because in California, I'd love to have a conservative Catholic charter school funded by the state that's run by, Catholic Church. But they are going to decide another education case in a couple of days, presumably, regarding the rights of parents in schools. So right now, there is kind of a split regarding how strong the parental right is past the threshold of the schoolhouse door. Like a lot of courts want to say, that you get to decide whether to send your kid to a public school or a private school or homeschool. But once you send your kid to the public school, you pretty much lose all your rights. And that's just not right. If you're
And
in
that was
nice.
never the intention, was it, of schools to take away a parent's rights, and
Right. Well, the weird thing is that we had these really great Supreme Court wins in the 1920s and 30s. And as a result, we got all these statutory protections. We passed laws saying, like in California, we have a very comprehensive opt-out scheme. You don't want to have your kid learning about weird sex stuff. You have a right under the Education Code to opt your kid out of it. But because we had such a comprehensive statutory scheme for the past 100 years, we haven't had to have cases litigating it. And it's only coming up again now when in California we have cases where your kid requests in the California law, gender identity is defined as the asserted gender identity of the person asserting it without regard to any statement by anybody else, including the person's parents. So it's a very circular definition whose only point is to say the kid gets to say what their gender identity is, parents have no say, and discrimination on the basis of gender identity includes not using your preferred pronouns. So as soon as the kid requests, all the teachers and staff have to start referring to the kid by their alternate pronouns, and they can't tell the parents because that would violate the kid's privacy. And
it's absurd, right? I mean,
Right.
just from a common sense perspective, it's totally absurd. But we know what's happening, and that's why I mentioned spiritual battle, because they want to drive a wedge between parents and children themselves. It's really something. These are important cases. These are important cases to fight because the ultimate goal is, I don't want to make a perfect analogy here, which but it's not exactly the same. But we had the Hitler youth camps. We had this in Marxism. They always knew that if they could get the children away from the parents, teach them what they wanted to teach them, they can indoctrinate them. And, Lenin in a very short time said, just give me a few years with them and I'll begin to change this whole society. And this is the danger we're under today. We can see it's very clear, actually, if you have eyes to see it, isn't it?
Right. There's not a lot of, unfortunately, it feels like not a lot of people can see it. Even on the liberal side, there's so many people who I feel like, wait, you actually believe your own propaganda? You do realize that's propaganda, right?
It's amazing.
It's
It's amazing. I have to smile because if I don't smile and laugh about this once in a while, I will go insane, and I'm sure you would too.
But yes, they've, especially in California, and that's where I have my family, the way the education system is set up, it does seem like it's procedurally brilliant in terms of setting up parents to fail and for the state to steal your kids. And
Yes.
you
Well,
just gotta
I'm
get
in the
aware
belly of
that
the beast here in
setup.
Illinois. So, we're right. We are competing with you to see who can ruin children and indoctrinate them and separate and knock down marriages and the families faster. And so, yeah, we're competing. I don't know who's winning right now, but maybe California by a nose. But yeah, it's brutal here. And so that question tonight, if you don't mind. So tonight I have a presentation called Stolen Innocence I'm giving in this area and Chicagoland area, and it really talks about the stealing the innocence of children, obliterating their moral imaginations, driving a wedge between parents and the kids, and we're fighting that right now here. What would parents do? I'm just waking up and I'm starting to recognize that there's something wrong finally. And we're trying to get them to move. We do two things. One thing is to actually take responsibility and teach their own children about sex education, et cetera, and opt out. But the problem with the opt-out agreements now, so we have to do more, because the problem with the opt-out agreements is that these gender ideologies, et cetera, critical race theories, they permeated every subject. I mean, they're in math now. They're in everything. And so we have to all stand up and just really have to stand up and be counted. But what can I tell them from a legal standpoint? That somebody will have their backs if they go to a school board. We saw this with the Biden administration where they actually harass people. The FBI harassed people. This is really scary for people.
One of my education cases that is wrapping up right now is all about gender identity and kids who are socially transitioned at school without their parents' knowledge or consent. And when that case first came across my desk as a potential, I was very anxious because I had studied a lot of these cases and there were already a dozen or half a dozen across the country that had been filed and lost. And so I was like, well, I don't want to have another loser. And we actually got one of the very first wins in the country, and probably the strongest win. And so I would say that.
Was that fairly recently? Congratulations.
Well, we got a preliminary injunction, which is a preliminary win essentially, in September of 23, and that I think really helped move the ball forward for a lot of other cases. And now we're going to be moving for final judgment later this year.
Oh, we'll have to follow you on that. Keep it, we're going to follow you on that one. Are you feeling, well, I don't want to give anything
Yeah,
away, and
well,
you probably,
we're feeling optimistic.
yeah, good, 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 good. Well, I'll tell you what, I really recommend people get to your book. Again, I'll put this in the show notes. I'll put a good picture up on the screen as we're talking about it, because it's very important. It's very important for people to be more familiar. If you want to stand up against some of this pressure, this tyranny, I don't want to overuse the word, but that's what we feel a lot. It's really a spiritual battle. And if you want to have conviction to stand up, I think you need to know the law, at least the basics of it, so that when I contact you, I kind of have an idea of some of the things that you're going through. You did a great job with that. You also did a great, it's very interesting, all those cases. In the limited time we have, we couldn't really unpack a lot of those idiosyncrasies, but it was really interesting. But I love this, and maybe as we go out here, and I'm cognizant of your time, talk about St. Thomas more, because that's how you end. It's a great way to end, because it's talking about it, to have the conviction to stand up. And can you talk a little bit about that and what that meant to you personally?
One of my favorite essays about Thomas More was written by Hilaire Belloc. And in that essay, he talks about how it would be one thing if Thomas More were being applauded by his friends, saying, wow, if only we were as great as him, as strong and brave and courageous. But no, his friends were saying, this guy's crazy. Right? They were saying, this guy who can be a little bit odd and wrote a socialist book called Utopia when he was in his youth, is now deciding to sacrifice everything over the objection of his wife, his kids, all of his friends. And yet now we think of Thomas More as a great man, and that he was obviously in the right. But even the people of goodwill were saying he was in the wrong, right? Even the devout Catholics. And I think that was what the point I wanted to emphasize in that last chapter, was that you do need to step back and think things through, and know that you're in the right, and then stand by it, right? Regardless of the pressures you get from your family, from your priests, right? And I think that's also why I liked writing the book in the way I did, is to educate people about how the legal system works, so that they can sit back, think it through, and say, okay, I do know I'm in the right. Because on the one half of the book is just a story of the cases. The other half of the book really is me doing my very best to explain the legal system for the layman, so they can follow these cases well. And once they know how to follow the cases, they can think them through for themselves and know where they'll go and go no further.
Yes, yes, yes. In order to do that, you have to educate yourself, and you have to understand not only the law here, but you also, and when I say understand it, at least have a sense of it and some of the legal terms that you outline. But you also have a personal conviction. And I think, what you said earlier is not enough people recognize what was going on. And I think this comes from that lack of faith, lack of personal conviction, lack of understanding and knowledge of our own faith. Because if you don't have that, you won't stand up either. I think you said it so well in the book, and again, this is a statement from St. Thomas More, is that we're all going to die. We're all going to die, right? And it's inevitable. And so I die today, you die tomorrow. And in essence, you make the statement, what do you live for? What do you live for? It's very meaningful. And we should all be pondering that. Are you pondering that as you're going about your work? You're a father with kids. As a dad, we want to leave this legacy down, don't we? We want to say, hey, Dad stood for something. Dad had courage to be a man in his profession, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that's important to all of us, and it should be, don't you think?
Well, I think the legacy that each of us needs to leave behind isn't really a legacy, right? Like I don't care that I went to the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't care. I mean, to a certain degree, yes, I love my clients, because I have very, very good clients, and I love helping them protect their religious liberty. But at the end of the day, what's most important to me is my own relationship with God. And all of these things help that. We'll all be forgotten. I mean, I can personally name the most important Supreme Court litigators right now, right? And I follow them, and I respect their work. I'm sure none of your listeners know who any of them are, and it's, and there's no need to. Right? As long as they're doing, because the reason they're doing their good work is not to build their name. The reason they're doing their work is to build their own personal relationship with Christ, and to know that they're doing everything they can to help help the world and know that by helping the world, they're building up their own relationship with Christ. And I think it's just important to keep our priorities straight. And that's what I was focusing a lot on at the end of because obviously I did pat myself on the back after winning at the U.S. Supreme Court, right?
We got to take our wins when we find them, don't we? Because it's brutal. It could be brutal out there.
But at the same time, it was okay, but don't, as my boss, Charles Landry, likes to say, don't steal glory from God, right? It wasn't my glory. It was God's glory.
Yeah, yeah. And he left us hanging on a cross, right? I mean, so he wasn't after that either. And I think the legacy that I think as a man we want to pass down is our faith, right? And our conviction and what's good, what's true, good, and beautiful, the transcendentals, and the beautiful faith of ours. And I think that's our legacy, right? Because when we pass that down, it's going to go from generation to generation to generation, and that's a beautiful thing, huh? So our Catholic faith means something, doesn't it? And I could tell from when I read your book too that your faith meant a lot to you. It was important for us and our listeners to read your perspective on that, and you did a really nice job. So thank you so much. Thanks for bringing it. Where are we going to buy the book from?
So the best place is sophiainstitute.com/unlocking. But I would also call your local Catholic bookstore and see if they have it. Because you should always support your local bookstores. And if not, ask them to order it and then buy it from them.
Okay, good. And not that you want anybody reaching out to you personally, but you said you do a lot of writing. Is it all legal writing, or is there some place we could follow you? Do you do any writing for the general public?
This was my first endeavor at that. Each appellate brief is usually 14,000 words. So
yes,
that's all I do every day.
Gosh. Yes. Hey, well, God bless you. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Go out and get Unlocking the Churches. It's a wonderful read. Bye-bye.
Thank you.